This message comes from Amazon Business. With smart business buying, get everything you need to grow in one familiar place, from office supplies to IT essentials and maintenance tools. Ready to bring your visions to life? Learn how at amazonbusiness.com.
You're listening to Code Switch from NPR. I'm Gene Demby, and we're looking at one of the most high-profile and aggressive raids in President Trump's ongoing immigration crackdown, and what that raid means for other big cities that might be on the business end of operations like that. Okay, so a little after midnight on September 30th, a surreal scene unfolded on the Chicago South Side. Military helicopters hovered above this large apartment building, and heavily armed and armored agents rappelled from those choppers onto the roof. There were flashbangs. Residents said that apartment doors were kicked down. You're hearing sound of it right now from News Nation, whose journalists were there with those federal agents. The neighbors nearby were woken up by all the commotion in this unusual raid to go after undocumented immigrants. One neighbor said later, that's how they came, like bin Laden was in there hiding or something. People who lived in that building were zip-tied. Some were half-dressed at the time. Many of them were children. Some of the people detained in the raid were U.S. citizens. But in the end, a few dozen people who lived there were taken away.
My name's Myra Quadra. I'm a journalist at the Invisible Institute, which is a nonprofit journalism organization on the south side of Chicago. We primarily investigate police misconduct.
Later on the morning of September 30th, Myra woke up to a flood of text messages.
And so immediately people from ICER, which is the organization that's leading a lot of the rapid response efforts, a lot of the immigration rights efforts in the city, they hit me up very quickly. Can you be there immediately and do some fact-finding for us because we don't know what's going on? There was nobody there. Walked in and saw a cleaning crew, spoke a little bit of broken Spanish to them, and then just kept walking through the building and just realized that almost every door had been kicked in or was already wide open. Everything was flipped over. Everybody's belongings were destroyed. There was water everywhere. It reeked of mold and urine and all kinds of smells that I'd never smelled before. And I had to leave after like 10 minutes to throw up.
Long before the raid, the building at the center of this military-style operation, 7500 South Shore Drive, had fallen into complete disrepair. Like, nothing in the building worked, which was a problem for the many people who lived in the building and the people who lived nearby. It had essentially been abandoned by its owner, even though that landlord was still collecting rent from the people there. A bank was suing that owner for unpaid fees, and according to the New York Times, there had been around 500 emergency calls regarding 7500 South Shore Drive so far this year. And all this chaos, all this disregard, was part of why the migrants who lived there ended up in that building to begin with. And that's what we're getting into today, because this Chicago raid, it's one of the most high-profile raids, so far at least, of President Trump's ongoing crackdown on undocumented immigrants. And not for nothing, his ongoing targeting of big Democratic cities. Because the president has said he wants to use Chicago and cities like Chicago as a training ground for military operations going forward.
This message comes from AT&T. There's nothing like knowing someone's in your corner, especially when it really counts. Like when your neighbor shovels your driveway after a snowstorm, or your friend saves you the last slice of pizza. AT&T has connectivity you can depend on, or they'll proactively make it right. That's the AT&T guarantee. Terms and conditions apply. Visit att.com/guarantee to learn more. AT&T. Connecting changes everything.
This message comes from Schwab. At Schwab, how you invest is your choice, not theirs. That's why when it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices. You can invest and trade on your own. Plus, get advice and more comprehensive wealth solutions to help meet your unique needs. With award-winning service, low costs, and transparent advice, you can manage your wealth your way at Schwab. Visit schwab.com to learn more.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Pete and Jerry's Eggs, inviting you to tag along with one of their organic pasture-raised hens as she heads out for her day in the pasture. She and her friends start to roam and forage, hunting for tasty organic snacks. And with 108 square feet per hen, there's plenty of space for everyone. Under the open sky, they can hear songbirds nesting in the trees. They bask in the sounds of nature as they prepare to lay their rich, delicious eggs. And when the sun starts to set, the crickets begin to sing. Time to catch one last squiggly snack before bedtime. To learn more about Pete and Jerry's organic pasture-raised eggs and the certified humane farms where their hens roam, visit peteandjerrys.com.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Betterment. Don't just imagine a better future. Start investing in one with Betterment. Betterment helps people and small businesses put their money to work by automating to make saving simpler, optimizing to make investing smarter, and building innovative technology backed by financial experts. So be invested in yourself. Be invested in your business. Be invested in better with Betterment at Betterment.com. Investing involves risk. Performance not guaranteed.
Okay, so what happened that night is a national news story, but the details speak to local problems that so many neighborhoods like the South Shore are grappling with. Myra Quadra said that when everything went down that night, there were cameras all over the place recording everything because the point of this raid was to be a spectacle.
I would describe it as very theatrically military style. It was clear from DHS's immediate statements following the raid that this was a photo shoot for them. They used the helicopters, they used flashbang grenades, they had soldiers rappelling and climbing in through windows, and they had a camera crew with them. They turned it into TikToks and Reels immediately. They had body cams on the ICE officers, which a lot of ICE officers don't have body cams on them, to use that footage in their propaganda videos. And this was well thought out. They knew that there were a lot of Venezuelan immigrants in the building. And they knew that this is in a neighborhood that is very poor, is almost entirely Black, and that the housing conditions were atrocious before this. And so it was all of these circumstances made it the ideal situation for them to conduct this dramatic raid, to make a spectacle out of it, in part because I think they would assume that people wouldn't care about the Black citizens who lived in there also being swept up in this raid. I think it was an extremely intentional choice to make this be the first military raid style of its kind in Chicago by ICE.
How did the migrants who lived at 7500 South Shore end up in that building, though?
Yeah, so when Governor Abbott of Texas bussed hundreds of migrants to Chicago as kind of a game of political football in 2023, 2024, the city of Chicago was floundering to try to figure out how to respond to this. These buses are just dropping people off at random locations around the city. They are not letting us know that they're coming. So they created temporary migrant shelters based in the sites of former motels, empty hotels, etc. They were never meant to be permanent.
And some of them were your neighbors, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I live pretty close to one of these former shelters that is now a completely empty motel again. Nobody's living in it. I know that some of those folks who were my neighbors were moved to that building that got raided. So they were moved to these buildings using state rental assistance grants. This rental assistance is a bit controversial because there are a lot of people in South Shore experiencing significant housing instability and homelessness. The wait list for Chicago Housing Authority support is notoriously long. The homeless shelters are full. People have been begging for rental assistance in South Shore. It's really the center of so much of the housing crisis and the eviction crisis in Chicago.
Then you have these migrants come in and they're getting this rental assistance that people have been clamoring for a long time.
Yeah, and so understandably, a lot of longtime Black residents of South Shore were pissed. And then I think what I've heard from talking with residents is that the neighbors in this building, the Venezuelan immigrants in this building and the Black residents in this building, for the most part, got along. They were like, okay, well, we're living together in this like objectively really upsetting condition, and the least we can do is like try to keep it as clean as we can together. Some have said that, oh, they helped me fix my car. We got along just fine. If you go around South Shore and talk to people now, you will hear a mix of people being like, they shouldn't have done this raid. It's not right to treat them this way. And some people being like, yeah, it wasn't right, but they did need to get out. And so it's a racial tension that is present. I don't want to undermine like the reality of how frustrated some people are. But for the most part, people are very upset that the building was ever in this condition to begin with, and that the raid would attack people in this way.
How did the residents who were not in this roundup, how did they feel about the raid? I imagine it was very jarring.
Before this raid, I noticed that people kind of thought this was a thing that would affect neighborhoods that had a lot more immigrants, and Latino neighborhoods specifically. Chicago can feel very segregated at times. There's like a lot of de facto segregation. And so starting in like early September 8th is when the like ramped up ICE raids began. They were mostly in the suburbs, the southwest side, the northwest side. And I really think people like on the southeast side, close to where I am, where that building is, kind of thought, okay, this is a majority Black neighborhood. ICE will probably focus over there, over west and more of the Latino neighborhoods. And so I think when people saw that Black citizens were also being detained and also having their rights violated, I think a lot of people were starting to have conversations that they previously thought that maybe like wasn't going to affect them as immediately and as deeply as this.
You mentioned that in the raid, a few people who are citizens were sort of swept up in it. Can you say a little bit more about what you've learned about those cases, if anything?
Yeah, there have been a few interviews with Black citizens who lived in the building who were detained for a few hours, zip-tied and put in large budget rental trucks for moving. That's what they use to transport people.
This is a dumb detail. Like they just don't just like loading people in like cargo.
Yes, there's an interview that I think it's easy to find that Don Lemon did with a man who was not only detained, but he was actually fully like taken to Broadview Detention Facility, which is right outside of Chicago, and that is like the main processing center for ICE before people are shipped outside of the state of Illinois.
We were in the truck for about, I'd say maybe 20, 25 minutes. They sealed the truck up and the truck pulled off.
And in that interview, he describes being zip-tied and in one of these trucks with, he estimates, close to 40 people.
We were in the back of a moving truck.
Were there seats in there?
No, it's like the trucks that you use to load your furniture in. It was a budget rental truck.
You know, if they hit a bump or whatever, they're just leaning on each other. And there's so many of them that they're able to keep each other upright. And the parallel of that description to how I've read about the way slave ships were packed with human beings gave me chills to watch that interview. He was eventually released. He describes like the inside of Broadview Detention Facility as like about 60 people in a room with one toilet and one sink. And he made his way back to South Shore, and Don Lemon interviewed him, like found him and interviewed him in front of that same building. And he and others describe like if they can leave that building, if they can move out at this point, they want to and they try to. But a lot of people still have nowhere else to go. The housing crisis is so bad that a handful of people, not that many, but a handful of people are still living in there because where else can they go?
Why do you think Trump is targeting Chicago?
Man, Trump is obsessed with Chicago.
Yeah, seems like it.
I think a lot of it ties back to during his election, long ago when he had to cancel a campaign rally because there was like such a big protest and people were like buying up rally seats so that it could be actually entirely a protest. And I think his ego was really bruised. And then I think he knows that he can capitalize off the long reputation that Chicago has had as like a war zone and kind of the similar propaganda rhetorical device that the American military has used to invade other countries, to be like, this place is so unstable, we have to swoop in and fix the government here. He's deploying a lot of that same rhetoric about our leadership, about Mayor Brandon Johnson or Governor Pritzker, and saying, oh, they can't get their problems under control, like we're going to come in and do it. And I do think to some extent that worked, where people who actually have felt unsafe in Chicago because of their own personal, like, repeated exposure to gun violence thought, well, maybe sending in the National Guard will do something. If we put big guys with guns on the street, maybe the little guys with guns won't use them. And now I think a lot of people are like, oh, that's not at all what's happened. Instead, they've just deployed this, like, Gestapo-style force on us, and it's not like they're providing any type of protection that makes people feel safer. One thing I would really love to highlight for people is we're seeing so many signs of resistance on a hyper-local level. And by resistance, I mean quite literally people seeing ICE and doing everything that they feel like they can do within their own risk tolerance to, you know, make noise, to call other people out to the street to also make noise, and to shame ICE for what they're doing, to document it. Like, people know that this comes with such dramatic risks, and still so many people are meeting their neighbors and coming outside to do everything they think they can do reasonably to, like, stop it from happening. And I have seen a few examples of that actually working, of ICE giving up and leaving, of people buying out street vendors so that they can go home, so that they don't have to be outside risking themselves, because street vendors are just getting snatched, like, left and right, and it is terrifying. And so, like, the cycling community is like, we'll do the street vending for you, we'll just buy out all your stuff, and we'll just give out this food. Wow. People are, like, going to whatever their most local school is and just standing nearby the school during drop-off and pickup to be like, we have to do this every day, because we have seen instances of, like, a parent being snatched when they drop their kid off to school. People are going to meetings that they never would have gone to organizing-wise. People are dropping off groceries to people because there's a lot of people sheltering in place because they're so afraid. And so I just really think it's important to highlight, like, there is something happening here that is really encouraging around people realizing where power is generated among people, and it is at, like, the very, very local level, and it is offline. So the whole decade plus we saw of, like, social media activism, I feel like in Chicago we're really seeing people understand the importance of investing their time into the opposite of that. And that makes me in some ways optimistic about the fact that we will outlast this incursion on our city.
Myra Kwaja is a reporter at the Invisible Institute, a journalism nonprofit on the south side of Chicago that primarily investigates police misconduct. Thank you, Myra.
Thank you so much, Gene.
And that's our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch, all one word. If email's more your jam, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. And subscribe to the podcast on the NPR app or, you know, wherever it is you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Code Switch newsletter by going to npr.org/Code Switch newsletter. And, you know, just a reminder that signing up for Code Switch Plus is a great way to support our show and to support public media. You might have heard that we need the help. And you get to listen to every episode sponsor-free. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/Code Switch. This episode you're listening to right now was produced by Xavier Lopez. It was edited by Leah Donnella and Dalia Mortada. And we'd be remiss if we did not shout out the rest of the Code Switch Massive. That's Christina Kala, Jess Kung, Verlin Williams, and B.A. Parker. As for me, I'm Gene Demby. Be easy, y'all.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Pete and Jerry's Eggs, inviting you to tag along with one of their organic, pasture-raised hens as she heads out for her day in the pasture. She and her friends start to roam and forage, hunting for tasty organic snacks. And with 108 square feet per hen, there's plenty of space for everyone. Under the open sky, they can hear songbirds nesting in the trees. They bask in the sounds of nature as they prepare to lay their rich, delicious eggs. And when the sun starts to set, the crickets begin to sing. Time to catch one last squiggly snack before bedtime. To learn more about Pete and Jerry's organic pasture-raised eggs and the certified humane farms where their hens roam, visit peteandjerrys.com.